Hi, this is pocketapocketa, and this will be the first of what I hope to be a series of videos describing the project that I've been working on for getting on for 2 years now, Radical Transparency, which is hosted at www.pocketapocketa.cz, a name taken from a story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, by James Thurber, for various reasons that you'll find in the website itself. Now, I started this, I guess that this effort itself to record a few podcasts going back right at the beginning of that project, maybe in March, April, what would it have been now? 2014? 2015. And I first began to talk about how I felt pretty vulnerable, I guess, as somebody with Asperger's syndrome and ADHD in the job market, though there's plenty of people out there who have reasons to be to feel vulnerable themselves. There's very few people who feel very secure in the work that they do right now. But having lost my job, I really started to reassess my priorities and what I want to do with myself. And this is something that I'd been doing for a long time, and indeed even when I was trying to get better jobs to support myself, I still primarily wanted to write. That had always been my focus, but I guess there's been a shift really in my commitment to doing that since that time I lost my job, and some of those reasons I go into in great depth in the project and in my writings, in Radical Transparency, the project as a whole, which you will see at GitHub and on the website. And it is essentially an open notebook of fiction, non-fiction, and various ideas, some of which will at a later stage become collaborative, I hope, in one way or another. And I started to look into this because of the difficulties I had had in the past in finishing writing projects because of my problems with concentration, and that is something that is improved steadily over time with the research that I've done into nutrition and various lifestyle hacks, I guess, in terms of improving those symptoms. But nevertheless, it's something that I have struggled with, and this project is in part a way to tackle that as well as anything else. It's philosophical and political implications, for example. The first videos were then focused on being autistic and what that means from the point that you go to school, because I was working at a school at the time, and it was a school that really made no effort at all to integrate people who were different in any way. And in fact, it was a school where, despite its philosophy of really being inclusive, it was a bureaucratic structure that actually pushed out anybody who was different in any way, and did so in a series of cowardly decisions, I guess. People there had no moral backbone or no kind of strength of character to actually be moral. And I saw that again and again, and we autistics are very kind of morally inflexible. It's something that if we know something is wrong, we can't align ourselves with it. And that is really another reason that I'm going into, that I've gone into doing what I've been doing in the last couple of years. Now, the project is a series of files of writing, essentially, but these are files, HTML files, which you can then see on the internet. And I'm looking at a log of the last few changes and so on that I've made here now, and I can do that because I have started to, or I started to edit and work on these files within a system that's called Git. Now, Git is a system that's loved by many geeks. It's designed essentially to work with software and code, but it has greater implications. You can use it for writing, as people do, usually to write technological kind of manuals and the like. But I can see here that 10 days ago I made a commit, which is I took a group of those documents and the changes I had made within them and pushed it forward as the leading edge of the repository as it looks right now, as the latest version, that is. And this one is called a murmuration. So what are we now with the with the 18th of November right now? So it's been just over a week since the election of Donald Trump in the USA, which has obviously changed a lot of things, but has changed a lot for this project and what it means as well. It's made it a lot more dangerous. It was dangerous already, but anybody who's expressing an opinion right now about such things as using secure operating systems, as being pro cryptography, pro free speech, and anybody who is really analyzing the political system and offering up a critique of the political system is really in many ways in danger now. And if I look at, let's see, a lot of the files that I've changed here most recently relate to a project that is called The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Manic Depressive, which I have in some way I've been thinking of for maybe 10-15 years. It maybe goes back more than that, and it goes into the concepts that we use to understand ourselves. So at one point in my life I understood myself through the lens of manic depression, and it's an open question as to whether I was correct or not to do that. But nevertheless, it interrogates that concept and others and the realities that we create for ourselves, while at the same time looking back over my life and the various difficulties I've had in that life and where my head was in the sense of what were the worlds that I was trying to create, usually unwillingly, and the worlds that kind of took over my experience from the people and the phenomena that were simply physically around me at the time. And it creates, or is intended to create or recreate, a kind of palimpsestuous, I call it, take on the world, where everything that's around me and everything that's in my head kind of overlays upon itself, and it's, how to describe it, nothing is simply what it is. Everything is there and a number of tangents at the same time. And anything else that's directly political in that last commit? A couple of interesting things actually. I won't perhaps point them out here. I've changed a few notes on a file, and this file perhaps shows a lot about what the project is, because this is a file that has existed for months, over a year, and it's nothing yet but a series of notes. Had I more time, if anybody showed interest in it, then I would perhaps start to work upon it. But currently it's called What We May Be Judged On. Now that is an essay in a folder called Literature of Fact, which touches upon what it is that we as civic society have to do to prevent encroaching fascism, totalitarianism, and to protect free speech and the freedoms that we claim to love. It was inspired by an essay in a magazine over here in the Czech Republic about the writer Bohumil Hrabal. This essay was written, or article rather, was written, I forget in what magazine now, but it was trying to interrogate Bohumil Hrabal's past and his choices in terms of his supposed collaboration with the communist regime at the time. Bohumil Hrabal stayed in the Czech Republic throughout the whole period of communism. Others escaped and were able to, like Josef Škvarecký, publish and set up publishing houses in his case, Toronto. Hrabal stayed, and he was published by the regime, and in being published by the regime, he permitted his work to be censored. And he was loved by all the people under communism, and subsequently many films were made of his work and the like. Now, I've read some of the censored versions of his work, and I think there's a lot you can still take away from it. But I was primarily irritated by this article simply because it was written by somebody who's the same age as I am. Now, I come from Britain, and I grew up in Britain. Now, my take on that is not simple, and, you know, currently I have an Irish passport, and I would only now get a British passport for pragmatic reasons, simply because I don't feel British, and I don't agree with a lot of things that Britain stands for and Britain has become. And I don't agree with a lot of things that England was when I was growing up there. I don't feel at home there. I don't feel comfortable there. And that also was my experience as I grew up. But this journalist who was writing about Bohumil Hrabal is the same age as I am. So, 1978. He would have been 11, around about. When the wall came down, it was the time of the Velvet Revolution, and that is, what are we going on now? 27 years ago, at around this time. Now, I was just irritated by the idea that somebody like that could judge Hrabal on such a superficial level without really making a great effort to understand the pressures that people faced in Czechoslovakia in the period of normalization before the Velvet Revolution, and even before, because Hrabal was writing, I don't know, in writing soon after the war, I think he began. My question then to him and to others like him were, what might we be judged on later on? So I was thinking, for example, does this guy use encryption? Does he protect his sources in every way that he can as a journalist? Does he make an effort to follow OPSEC, operational security, in working with information? Does he make an effort to really see what's going on now and the problems that we face now, and to pick apart any kind of propaganda that we might be surrounded by, any kind of political myth and the like? Does he really make an effort to engage with the political process that is going on now? Does he do everything that he will have to do in order to protect democracy and the freedoms that we claim to hold dear? And my very strong suspicion is that, fuck no, he doesn't do 5% of what you would hope that somebody like that in his position would do. That is my very strong suspicion, and the essay is an effort to express that, or to look into those problems. But as I say, right now it's a handful of notes. It's a handful of notes about a few of the things that have come up as well in the time that that file has existed. So I guess if I were going to tap it in here, where are we? Literature of facts. What we may be judged on. So yeah, so there are other things we may be unjudged on, and where are we? Our engagement with politics, with the culture around us, our lifestyles with regard to consumerism and sustainability. And then there's a comment that this was intended to be based upon Tor and doubts we may have about it, and or whether we even know about its existence and attempt to trust but verify, or do nothing at all. Journalists who do not even attempt to take any kind of stance on things like Tor and its alternatives are simply not doing enough and ought to be judged in the future. Journalists who choose to be too scared to write about Trump before he is elected ought, of course, to be judged. And of course, this remains the case now that there are many journalists and others clamouring to support and normalise Trump now that he has been elected and is, for now, President-elect of the United States of America, putting together his team that is so beloved of David Duke. And then there's other things, there are other dilemmas, I say, by would-be dissidents today. I would extend that actually not dissidents, who are people who have already committed, but I would say this is something that relates to anybody who would consider themselves a member of civic society. So this must relate to Tor, I2P, Bitcoin, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other dilemmas faced by would-be dissidents today. And later on, it seems, and if I were writing this, I would go into it, and I don't always agree with myself. I don't start out with an idea that then I will explore, and that's the take I'm gonna have. I might start writing this essay and then decide that Bohumil Hrabal, in fact, was a willing collaborator of the communist regime. I doubt it. I don't think that that's the take that I'll have when I go into this, if I ever go into it, but it might be that. I could surprise myself. But here it says, Hrabal, I would say, did good, and arguably better than Kundera. And then there's a few other things that I'm kind of looking at in these notes, which are more playing the devil's advocate, I guess. But I guess it's important to do that when we put together structures and start to organize against what we face now. It's important to ask the questions that might appear to be obvious but aren't. And some of those questions will relate to Tor, or it could be that the EFF is a front for the NSA. Now, I don't think it is, but that's a question that I can ask because I don't know. And I don't think that we can afford to believe that there are just simply stupid questions right now. We're going to ask everything. Some of them might very quickly be, dismissed. Great, we'll move on from them. But that's one of them, any case. So that's one of the things I changed recently. Then there are others. So there are some of them which become simply containers. So I often create on the fly a number of files simply from a template file that I have, and later on they may be filled up with either notes or with something more substantial, or they might not. So if you end up clicking around kind of pocketapocketa.cz or CZ, yes, then you might occasionally come across some of these. So there's a couple of what could become stories that I created here on the fly, and it looks like they are probably for the moment just template files. Yeah, what else we got? If I look at what I'm doing right now, what I've been working on today, let's have a look today in the last few days, in that last 10 days. I've got here some more explicitly political stuff, which you would expect. This will be the first commit, I think, since the, since the election? 10 days? Yes, it will. So I've got references here to Pavel Koholt. I've got a file now which is called Charter 17, which anybody familiar with the history of the Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic will know what that is name checking, whether or not it could ever hope to, you know, do anything like that document did. We can doubt it, but one of the founding statements of the whole dissident movement in the Czechoslovakia was, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And however idiotic something like this may appear to be, who cares? Get it out there. If somebody else does it better, welcome that. But do something. So this is my something, and this is kind of a document that I created vaingloriously, whatever, I don't know or care. But on the evening of, I guess the 9th, when the results in America started coming out. And so there are many different parts of the project. I'll just possibly go over the main strands quickly. So you have old novels that I was working on, old short stories that I was working on. So you've got a number of containers of of modules which look at works of fiction that I have worked on in the past. So often you get fragments that are incompleted. Again, it's the ADHD mindset. Many of them could be completed in the future if I found money, if I found time to work on them, if there was sufficient interest to developing them. And part of this project is about kind of trying to gain awareness for some of those. There's no point in them just sitting unfinished on a hard drive. You know, I'm not going to send them off as submissions when they're unfinished, so hell, why shouldn't they just be here? And I guess I also started looking at surveillance and things like that more so I thought, well, if they're here on my hard drive, there's a hell of a lot of people already who can read them, so why not just put them out there? You can essentially consider most things published that are sitting on your hard drive, but they're published to the elites who are ripping apart our democracies and our open societies. So why simply speak to those when you can just put it out there for everybody? So that's what I started to do. I'm not going to talk about the individual projects. I can do that in a different series of videos or whatever else. Then we have essays, as I mentioned, and there is one that I was looking at the other day which feels really kind of sixth formish. That is, it feels very kind of juvenile, excitable politics. I think it could be something more than that, but the pronounceable name for that project is Ratchets. It's something, it's an extended essay that began as an attempt at a blog post, and I wasn't very good at that, which a guy called Vinay Gupta once asked for over on Twitter, just very perfunctorily, when we had a quick exchange a couple of months ago. I don't imagine that exchange was very significant for him, but it did set me off on a different track for that period, and that is something I hope I might one day return to. Then there is something like a blog. I did have a blog, and then that's a long story, we won't go into that. But something like a blog, a series of diaries and things like that. Some people may get off on that because it's kind of, you know, very oversharing and whatever else, and some people will love that shit. I'll take a lot of flack for it, but fuck it. It's part of the project. It was there for a long time. And I don't know, talk of politics of the Czech Republic, of Czech literature, and of books certainly will feature quite a lot. It's difficult to talk about what this project has been for me at different phases and at different times. It's been a lot of different things and will continue to be so. Essentially, the project is flux. So I'm not going to sit down here and say this is what it is. This is precisely what this podcast series will be, because it's kind of going to change, you know. So if you're uncomfortable with that, then really go elsewhere. It's lo-fi. It's fairly open, though not completely. It's not completely open source, and I retain some copyright or various, you know, the licenses are not all free, certainly, and not all Creative Commons, but that's an element of it. And all I wanted today really was to open this up. I'll try and take this video and simply do something with it, maybe try to stream it as a kind of torrent or something, or rather put it up as a torrent rather than stream it. And so that'll do for now. So if you've listened this far, then thank you, and hopefully see you again sometime.